Tonight you step outside and something feels wrong in the sky. That familiar gray disk hanging where it always hung for 4.5 billion years has vanished, not hidden behind clouds or eclipsed by Earth's shadow, just gone. Most people would glance up, make a joke about werewolves being out of work, and head back inside because this feels like someone else's problem to solve. And that's exactly the version YouTube thumbnails want you to believe. The playful thought experiment that sounds like trivia night at a bar where nothing real is at stake. What those videos skip past is the part where coastlines worldwide start behaving in ways no living human has witnessed within 6 hours of the moon's disappearance. They skip the part where ecosystems that spent 400 million years synchronizing their biology to lunar cycles begin collapsing within weeks. And they definitely skip the part where Earth's axial tilt starts drifting toward values that turn temperate zones into frozen wastelands and back again while your species scrambles to understand what went wrong. A decoration is what most people think the moon is. That assumption misses everything. What actually floats up there is a 73 billion trillion kilogram stabilizer bolted to your planet's rotational axis, a 3.5 terawatt engine driving ocean currents across the globe, and the biological pacemaker for more species than scientists have finished counting. Entertainment is how everyone treats this question. Here's the fine print on what actually happens, so let's read it together. Water breaks first. Right now, the moon generates 66% of Earth's tidal force, while the sun handles the remaining 34%, and that ratio exists because tidal force scales with the inverse cube of distance. The sun outmasses the moon by 27 million times, but proximity wins this equation by a wide margin, which means the moon dominates tidal physics, and it's not even close. 2/3 of that tidal energy vanishes the moment the moon disappears, permanently, starting now. Canada's Bay of Fundy currently experiences tidal swings of 16.8 meters, meaning the difference between high and low tide spans a 5-story building twice every day. Without lunar gravity pulling on that water, the range collapses to 5 or 6 meters overnight. One of Earth's most dramatic tidal systems just lost 65% of its power before sunrise, and that's only the beginning. Here's what the thought experiment videos leave out. Tides aren't just water sloshing up and down beaches for visual effect. 3.5 terawatts of energy flows into Earth's oceans through tidal motion, and 2.5 terawatts of that just disappeared with the moon. Roughly 1 terawatt of the missing energy had been driving vertical ocean mixing, the mechanical process pulling cold, nutrient-rich water up from the depths and pushing it through marine food chains that feed half the planet. That same mixing powers the thermohaline circulation, the planetary conveyor belt moving warm water from the tropics toward the poles. Northern Europe sits 5 to 10 degrees Celsius warmer than its latitude should allow because of this circulation, which explains why London shares latitude with Calgary, and Dublin sits level with Newfoundland without freezing like their North American counterparts. Warm Atlantic water arrives via currents that lunar tides help drive, and that pump just lost most of its power. The climate consequences haven't started registering yet because the ocean has thermal mass measured in years, meaning the full temperature disruption hits on delay, like a slow-motion car crash you can calculate but can't stop. Ocean current disruption takes years to fully manifest, but what happens to living things moves faster, and it's worse than the currents. If you're enjoying my video, please subscribe, hit the like button, and comment below. I worked very hard researching this video, and I'd appreciate any support you can give me. Thanks. Every May and June, roughly 31 million horseshoe crabs converge on Delaware Bay beaches, timing their arrival to full and new moon phases when spring tides create optimal spawning conditions. Each female deposits around 90,000 eggs in the sand, and those eggs sustain up to 80% of the Rufa red-knot shorebird population during their 9,000-mile migration from South America to the Arctic. Horseshoe crabs time their spawning to lunar cycles, while red-knots time their migration to horseshoe crab spawning, and that's a biological synchronization chain that took millions of years to calibrate. Both species now find themselves operating on schedules that no longer connect to physical reality, and this is where it gets worse. California grunions spawn exclusively on the 3 to 4 nights immediately following spring tides, riding the highest waves onto beaches where females bury themselves tail first to deposit eggs. Those eggs incubate for exactly 10 days, protected from wave action because tides won't reach that high again until the next spring tide arrives to trigger hatching. Spring tides no longer exist without the moon. The dramatic high-low variation that Grunion reproduction requires vanished overnight, which means a species that successfully reproduced this way for 5 million years just discovered its entire reproductive strategy no longer functions. Coral reefs are about to have a very bad time too. More than 80% of reef-building corals are broadcast spawners that release eggs and sperm simultaneously across entire reef systems, timing their once-annual mass spawning to specific nights following full moons. Research published in PNAS identified the mechanism. Darkness between sunset and moonrise triggers spawning within a 10 to 30-minute window. Deleting the moon means deleting the synchronization queue for coral reproduction across populations separated by hundreds of kilometers. Fertilization requires eggs and sperm to encounter each other in open water, and that window lasts minutes rather than hours. Random spawning instead of coordinated spawning collapses fertilization rates, and reef recovery grinds to a halt. Here's the fine print nobody reads. Coral reefs support 25% of all marine species despite covering less than 1% of the ocean floor, which means a quarter of ocean biodiversity depends on an ecosystem that just lost its reproductive timing mechanism. The cascade doesn't stop at coral. Still think this counts as a fun hypothetical? Consider the 137,600 square kilometers of mangrove ecosystems that depend on tidal flushing to deliver nutrients, or the fisheries providing primary protein for roughly 1 billion people worldwide, or the $321 billion in annual U.S. fishing industry revenue that just lost its foundational ecological driver. Immediate biological chaos unfolds within months, but the truly catastrophic consequences operate on longer timescales, and this is where the fine print gets genuinely uncomfortable. Earth's axial tilt sits at 23.4 degrees right now, and that single number determines everything about your seasons. Summer happens because your hemisphere tilts toward the sun, while winter happens because it tilts away. The tropics, the temperate zones, the polar regions, every climate classification taught in schools exists because of that 23.4 degree angle. Here's what nobody mentions in the thought experiment videos. That tilt isn't stable on its own because Earth's axis wants to wobble chaotically under gravitational tugs from Jupiter and other planets, and the only reason it doesn't is because the moon acts as a 73 billion trillion kilogram gyroscopic anchor holding everything steady. Jacques Lascar's 1993 research in Nature demonstrated that lunar gravity constrains Earth's obliquity to oscillate gently between 22.1 and 24.5 degrees over 41,000-year cycles, a 2.4 degree wobble. Enough to shift climate patterns measurably, but not catastrophically. That's the stable range your species inherited without earning it. Lascar's models show what happens without that anchor. Earth enters a chaotic zone where axial tilt can swing anywhere from 0 degrees to approximately 85 degrees over millions of years. 0-degree tilt means seasons stop existing entirely. The equator bakes under permanent direct sunlight, while poles sit in eternal twilight, and every assumption about agricultural zones, migration patterns, and climate adaptation becomes obsolete, because the foundational geometry changed overnight. 85-degree tilt means Earth rolls around its orbit on its side like Uranus. Each pole experiences months of continuous sunlight, followed by months of continuous darkness, while the equator becomes the coldest region on the planet because it never receives overhead sun. Ice caps form and melt based on orbital position rather than latitude, creating climate swings no existing ecosystem evolved to survive. Here's the part the playful hypotheticals skip entirely. Civilization-ending problems don't require hitting 85 degrees. Even moderate variations in the 20 to 25 degree range shift climate belts by hundreds of kilometers per swing, which means agricultural zones migrate faster than forests can follow, while species adapted to specific temperature ranges find their habitats sliding poleward or equatorward, depending on which phase of the wobble cycle Earth happens to occupy. Mars provides your preview of this future. Without a significant stabilizing moon, Martian axial tilt has wandered between 0 and 60 degrees over its history, and statistical analysis shows a 63% probability of exceeding 60-degree tilt within any billion-year window. That's your planet's trajectory now, just with more water and more people watching it unfold. The thought experiment crowd treats timescales measured in millions of years like they don't count. Here's why that thinking fails. Human civilization spans roughly 10,000 years. Agriculture requires climate stability within certain bounds to function. Everything your species built, every city and farm and institution, rose during a window of unusual planetary steadiness that the moon was providing. That steadiness just ended. Nobody alive today will witness 85-degree tilt. but descendants might see the beginning of drift that makes long-term planning impossible. The fine print doesn't care about human schedules. Feeling good about that fun thought experiment? We still need to cover what else the moon was quietly doing that nobody talks about. Every moment of every day, lunar gravity raises the solid rock beneath your feet by 20 to 55 centimeters at equatorial latitudes. Not the ocean, the actual crust of the planet, flexing upward and settling back twice daily as the moon pulls on solid matter. GPS measurements accumulated over 20 years show plate tectonic motion correlating with lunar cycles at 8.8-year and 18.6-year intervals that match the moon's orbital precession patterns. Continental drift speed may be influenced by the moon, and removing it introduces an unmodeled variable into the system that moves everything on Earth's surface over geological time. Here's where the fine print ventures into territory that should concern everyone. A 2016 CNRS study proposed that lunar gravity contributes significantly to maintaining Earth's magnetic field. The classical model for generating that field faces a paradox because it requires more core cooling than geological evidence suggests actually occurred. Researchers calculated that 3,700 billion watts flow into Earth through gravitational energy transfer from the Earth-Moon-Sun system, with over 1,000 billion watts potentially available to drive the outer core convection, generating magnetism. If this model proves correct, losing the moon weakens the magnetic field over geological time. That field deflects solar radiation before it strips away atmospheric gases. Mars lost its magnetic field billions of years ago and subsequently lost most of its atmosphere. Earth might eventually follow the same path, just slower and with witnesses. Tidal friction from the moon also breaks Earth's rotation, adding 2.3 milliseconds to each day per century, while the moon itself recedes at 3.82 centimeters per year, carrying that stolen angular momentum away. Removing the moon stops that breaking instantly. Earth's day stabilizes permanently at 24 hours, which sounds fine until you realize every tidal rhythm on Earth calibrated itself to a system that included lunar influence. Human biology didn't escape this calibration either. Sleep studies found people take 5 minutes longer to fall asleep near full moons, sleep 20 minutes less, and show 30% reduction in deep sleep brain activity with measurably lower melatonin secretion. A 2021 study tracking indigenous communities and university students found participants went to bed 30 to 80 minutes later in the nights before full moons, regardless of cultural background or artificial lighting access. Hundreds of thousands of years of evolution under moonlight shaped human neurology. That's not poetry, but selection pressure molding circadian rhythms across thousands of generations. That light cue just vanished, and human brains now operate in nighttime conditions they never encountered during the entire evolutionary history of the species. Darkness itself changes everything for nocturnal animals. Full moonlight delivers 0.1 to 0.3 lux of illumination, only 1/380,000th the brightness of sunlight, but millions of species calibrated hunting, navigation, and mating behavior to that dim silver glow. Barn owl hunting efficiency varies measurably by moon phase. Dung beetles navigate using moonlight, crossing test platforms in 40 seconds under full moon conditions versus 2 minutes on dark nights. Every nocturnal predator-prey relationship on Earth just shifted in ways nobody can fully model because the variable was never zero before now. That's what actually happens when the moon vanishes. Tides collapse to 1/3 strength within hours, eliminating the mechanical mixing driving ocean circulation and marine nutrient distribution. Northern Europe starts cooling on a delay, while the Atlantic conveyor weakens. Ecosystems that synchronized breeding and migration to lunar rhythms find themselves running schedules that no longer match physical reality. Horseshoe crabs spawn at the wrong times, grunion eggs wash away before hatching. Coral reproduction becomes random chance instead of coordinated strategy, and fisheries feeding 1 billion people lose their foundational ecological driver. Earth's axial tilt loses its anchor and begins drifting toward values that could eventually flip climate zones upside down, turning equators cold and poles tropical on timescales your species might not survive to witness. The stability window that allowed agriculture and civilization to exist starts closing. Solid Earth tides stop flexing the crust twice daily, while plate tectonics loses an input variable. The magnetic field may weaken over millions of years, exposing the atmosphere to solar stripping. Human sleep patterns lose a cue they evolved to expect, while every nocturnal animal on Earth adjusts to permanent darkness that none of their ancestors ever experienced. YouTube thumbnails frame this scenario as entertainment, a playful what-if filling 10 minutes between videos about black holes and alien megastructures. What they're actually describing is the removal of a load-bearing component from every system on the planet, physical and biological and geological, followed by cascading failures that start immediately and continue for longer than human civilization has existed. The moon isn't optional. It never was. Fine print on your planetary inheritance included lunar presence as a foundational assumption, and every system you depend on got built on that assumption holding true. Now you know what the contract actually says. What's the next cosmic arrangement you want the fine print on? I've got some thoughts about what happens when the sun enters its red giant phase, and I'll warn you now, the timeline runs more uncomfortable than the brochures suggest.